Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Mountainside Communion. My name is Josh Smith. I'm one of the pastors here at Mountainside Communion, and I want to welcome you to this Know Your Rights, Know Their Rights workshop put on by the Immigration Resource Center. It is really wonderful to see all of you, to see such strong partners in the good work that we all do here in the local community, and just to be together in a really important time like we're in our society. A couple housekeeping details before we move forward. There are some really great treats and coffee in the back. If you would like some of those are available and highly recommended. If you need to use the restroom or anything like that, they're right off the foyer in the back, and you can find those pretty easily from the signage out there. 20 years ago, I was in a coffee shop here in town. It's now Gray and Cash, but it was a different coffee shop back then. And I was talking to a man who told me that worship was the most wasted hour of his week. And as a young aspiring minister, I was both discouraged and challenged at the same time. And at the end of our conversation, much of the stories I could understand and empathize with, he asked me if I wanted to know what kind of church he would go to. And I said, well, of course. And he said, have you ever read the passage Micah 6:8, which says, "O human, what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice and to love mercy and to walk humbly with God." And so it is a great privilege to be in a room full of people, no matter what your faith backgrounds are, no matter what your story is. We're here because we want to do the good work of justice and mercy and to walk humbly and boldly together in these really trying times for our brothers and sisters who are immigrants here in our country. So our work today is so important, as you all know, and we're just really, really glad that you've come out and joined us in this. For those who are on the live stream, we want to thank you for sounding in as well and for joining in this good work that we're all celebrating. First person I want to introduce, we have a couple of ministries going on here. If you walked in and enjoyed the garden at all, that's a partnership with the city of Monrovia and with a wonderful organization called Food Ed. Gio is here who helps lead Food Ed, and we're really thankful for that. And we have another great partnership with the city called the Housing Displacement Response Program. So if you have any questions about those, I'm happy to talk with you afterwards. But today, the initiative that really started 10 years ago here in this place, and which is so important for our work together, is something called the Immigration Resource Center of San Gabriel Valley. And our staff from the IRC is going to be presenting today and giving us some just really helpful information on how we can know our rights and know the rights of our brothers and sisters who are immigrants so that we can stand with them in justice, in mercy, and in bold humility together. So I want to introduce to you our Director of Development and Strategic Partnerships, Jean Grant. And Jean's going to come up and give us some more introductions.
Thank you, Josh. 10 years ago, the idea of the Immigration Resource Center started right here, not in this room because they've changed locations, but it was somebody who said, we need to do this. It was when DACA first came out. And let's start helping people get DACA. And it was as simple as that. And 10 years later, we're a fully established nonprofit organization with our own board and our own volunteers and our own fundraising streams. And it just gives me so much pleasure to bring up Jonathan, who is our Director of Legal Services and is an amazing human. He's been with the organization nearly 9 years. I'm up to 8. We're the OGs now, 8 years, 9 years, and we're 10 years old. So, but many of you were here before it ever began, and we're grateful for that as well. This program will be streaming on YouTube right now, and then there will be a link later if you want to share it with a friend, and please do share it. And then we will also have it translated into Spanish, and we'll send that link out to you as well. So if you ever need anything, reach out to ircsgv.org, and you will be able to find all of us there. Again, restrooms are in the back, and we're going to get started. So welcome, Jonathan Fung.
Thank you. All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Jonathan Fung. I am the Director of Legal Services for the Immigration Resource Center of San Gabriel Valley. As Jean had mentioned, I have been working here for nearly 9 years. I have about 10 years of immigration law experience, and I'm just really grateful that all of you are here today to see how we can support our immigrant brothers and sisters. I wanted to talk a little bit about what our organization does and what we're going to cover today before we jump into the material. So the Immigration Resource Center of San Gabriel Valley provides direct legal services to usually local families. A lot of our work revolves around family reunification, people who live in mixed status families, some who might be married to U.S. citizens or have U.S. citizen children, and people who are also survivors of different types of crime. Usually domestic violence, that makes up a good chunk of our work. And finally, a little bit of everything else. We do DACA, we're doing a lot of work with Afghan refugees. We do work around temporary protected status, TPS, and we help people who already have their green cards, their permanent residency, become citizens. So there's just a grab bag of different things we do. And we try to cover the gap for where people who cannot afford legal services, cannot afford to take advantage of the benefits that they're legally qualified for, will still have access to the law and still have access to everything that they deserve. So today's topic, Know Your Rights, Know Their Rights, training for immigrant allies in workplaces, schools, and churches. What I'd like to do is just start off with an overview of the landscape, what is currently going on right now with immigration law and policy coming from the federal government, then go into what we can do in our own workspaces and the places that we reside in our community, and then finally kind of cover some topics that can, resources and information that we can share with our immigrant friends and family members and community members. These are things that hopefully will be really easy to pass on, so you don't feel like you have to be a legal expert yourself or that you're giving legal advice, which we can't do unless you're an attorney, and resources that you can pass on so that people can feel protected and prepared for what's happening in the world. All right, so let's jump straight into our first slide. What most of you are probably here for is because you are quite concerned about what you're hearing in the news, about what you're seeing in social media, and what you're hearing from the White House. So as you all know, within the first day of President Trump's inauguration, there were a slew of executive orders, and a lot of them related to immigration. One of them in particular was titled Protecting the American People Against Invasion. And what this order did was it framed what is happening at not just the southern border, but what is happening with immigration in general as an invasion, as all undocumented people in the U.S. are sort of these enemy combatants who are trying to invade the United States and quote unquote, take away the sovereignty and violate the borders of this country. And so when interviewed, the president talked about the goal of these orders to deport all 12 million undocumented people currently living in the United States. When J.D. Vance was interviewed, he said, maybe that number is too big. Let's go for something more reasonable, like 1 million people a year, right? So the point is not necessarily the actual number that they're aiming for. The point is that the goal is to maximize detention, maximize immigration enforcement, and to emphasize the maximal nature of all of their efforts to engage in immigration enforcement, right? So this executive order kind of ordered the entire federal government to push towards detention, push towards deportation, and divert as many resources as possible towards this goal. So one of the first things that came out of that order was an internal ICE memo that started to rescind some of the Biden era and Obama era policies regarding how immigration enforcement should be conducted. And one of those memos was titled or known as the Sensitive Locations Policy, which told ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the main body that is tasked with removing people from the United States in the interior, they said that we no longer want to consider certain places as sensitive. Places before that would be considered maybe too disruptive to the community, such as schools, hospitals, and churches, and other religious ceremonies like weddings, funerals, places where children are. Those would require a very heightened standard before you would conduct any enforcement action, and like supervisory approval. They said now, let's just use common sense. Let's take away all those safeguards and just say you can go wherever you want as long as you use common sense. And they framed it as, again, this is going to be a protective measure for a community. Rapists and murderers and criminals are no longer going to be hiding in a church or hiding in a hospital or hiding in a school. And of course, we see the maximal nature of the language again, right? As framing all undocumented immigrants, all people who might be going to these places as normal routines of their day-to-day life, as probably being criminals and murderers and rapists. So this caused a lot of concern within our community. How can we respond to this sort of dismantling of the guardrails and entry of ICE potentially into all of our personal spaces, right? To give a little bit of context for how likely this is to happen, I do want to talk about resources too, because just because there's an executive order saying that we want to maximally enforce immigration doesn't mean it can happen, right? It's going to be bounded even in the mind of the president. He's constrained by actual reality and actual resources. So ICE, they have 22,000 officers on staff or personnel on staff. They have funding for 41,000 beds. That's at maximum capacity as of right now, and it was at maximum capacity even before he became president. And as of right now, about 2 months into his presidency, even after that maximal language, he's been able to remove 555 people per day on average. That is going to be a very far cry from the 1 million people stated goal, and probably will never get there. However, there is an upcoming bill to increase funding for ICE. So one of the goals of the next, one big beautiful budget bill that is coming up is going to be funding them at a rate of $175 billion. Right now, ICE only receives $8 billion, so they're hoping to expand the budget by over 20 times. To give you some context for this number, it's a big number, but this is about the same amount of money that the US government gave to Ukraine to fight an actual invasion of about 1 million Russians in what analysts consider the second best army in the world. And they've been able to do that successfully. So there's no doubt that $175 billion is going to drastically change the enforcement landscape of the United States. And we will probably have to keep a very close eye on what that turns into and if that bill actually goes through. But they probably have the votes. So I wanted to talk a little bit about immigration enforcement and its implementation. With all the language around removal, what have they been doing? Now, normally, what happens is we have this thing called due process, where you have the right under the law before the government removes benefits or entitlements from you to have a hearing, to go through, present your defenses, go through a legal process. And And for immigration, there are immigration courts. There's something called EOIR, Executive Office for Immigration Review. That is part of the executive branch. So these courts are not the same as like federal courts. They are part of the federal government under the president's control. But there's at least an administrative process, right? That you can say, let me show up to court. You're going to get a court date, a notice to appear, and you can present your defenses, maybe showcase how there's going to be hardship to your family, to U.S. citizen family members, children, spouses, parents. You might be able to present something like a case that you would be persecuted, tortured if you were deported, and sometimes this process can take years, right, for you to present your claims for the government to prove that you are deportable. So that is very problematic for the federal government because they want to deport everybody in 4 years, and this is not going to be possible if everybody gets their day in court. So they figured out, let's try to use as many shortcuts as possible. There's something called expedited removal, and typically it's meant for encounters at the border or near the border. If the government, if Customs and Border Protection, CBP, finds you at the border and they think that you've been there for less than 14 days and you're within 100 miles of any land and sea border, then they can immediately, without taking you to court, just remove you from the country. So the Trump administration looked at the law and they figured, you know what? We can change that to be anywhere in the US. We don't have to have it be 100 miles. We can also change that to 2 years instead of 14 days. So they figured maybe if we just encounter somebody on the street and we think that they haven't been here for at least 2 years, we can also skip the entire court process. They've also tried to use something called the Alien Enemies Act, the AEA. That is a very old law, I think enacted before 1800, and it is meant for deporting and detaining people who are nationals of enemy nations without a hearing, right? Because that way you can very quickly act and defend national security by getting rid of spies, getting rid of soldiers, that sort of thing. He figured, or the federal government figured, that they could use this to enhance deportation proceedings. They're using it to send people to Guantanamo Bay and to El Salvador. And if you have been alive during the war in Afghanistan, you may remember Guantanamo Bay as being our preferred place of putting people without a hearing. Usually people that we don't have enough evidence to convict or take to actual trial, but we felt a little uncomfortable about releasing after we conducted light waterboarding on them. So we decided that we can use this process for deporting people as well. And over the last weekend, you may have heard that there were over 100 Venezuelans that were deported and sent straight to a Salvadoran mega prison, CICA. And what they have used is a combination of this Alien Enemies Act and also expansion of what they call the list of foreign terrorist organizations. Now they're putting in different cartels and different gangs, and they're saying, you know what? If you're in a gang that we designate as a terrorist organization, then you're like an enemy combatant, and we can just deport you without a hearing and throw you in jail. As you may have noticed, Venezuela is not El Salvador, and normally when somebody is going to be removed from the US, they're going to be sent back to their country of origin. In this case, because of the designation that all these Venezuelans were part of Tren de Aragua, we sent them straight to a supermax facility in El Salvador, also without hearing, also for indefinite detention. And this is hugely problematic because to get on one of these gang lists, you don't actually have to be convicted. You don't actually have to go to court. You don't have a chance to appeal it. You just go in front of an officer, and if they think your tattoo looks kind of funny, or you're dressed in certain colors, or you're friends or certain people, you're a gang member. So all this to say, there's a lot of due process shortcuts that the government is attempting to utilize. That law has already, or the implementation of that law has already been enjoined, but the planes have already taken off, and people are already in this Salvadoran super jail. So the cat is out of the bag, and it's very hard to reverse some of these actions. One of the other things that the government is trying to do to get around that limitation of not enough beds, not enough people, is they're taking budget shortcuts by co-opting the rest of the federal government. So you might hear that they're trying to get the IRS involved, the DEA, the ATF, FBI, just about every other federal agency that has law enforcement power, even if they are typically not related or skilled or have any idea how immigration enforcement works, to be part of these enforcement efforts. They also are co-opting non-enforcement branches. So we usually say, there's ICE, and that's part of Department of Homeland Security. What we're working with is USCIS, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. They're the good guys. They provide the benefits. They are going to be restricted in how they interact with ICE under certain policies. So it's not like you don't have to be afraid that you're sharing your information with one branch of the government, that you're just open to enforcement. But those lines are being blurred now that they're kind of co-opting people from every agency to be part of this. So I can't really say that anymore if the same people who are going to be doing the benefits applications and adjudicating those are also going to be sometimes dragged into enforcement operations. Now they might be the exact same people. And they're co-opting the military and National Guard. There is a law called the Posse Comitatus Act that prevents the military from being used for civil enforcement. They can't just use them as police, but they can use them for the resources. So what they can do is use military flights to deport people. They can maybe free up some of the personnel at the border by putting the military there instead. And that way you have more money for doing the interior enforcement. And how that has ended up panning out is we see a lot of high visibility enforcement, right? They kind of want to make sure that people see what the administration is doing, so they'll invite the media to kind of tag along for large scale raids. They're going to say ahead of time, like, we're going to target sanctuary cities and jurisdictions that are opposed to the federal government, and we're just going to show how we're conducting a raid in that community. They're also targeting people with certain political affiliations. So you might have heard of a student activist at Columbia who was associated with a lot of pro-Palestinian protests, but was actually non-documented, had a green card, being detained, right? And basically the Department of State is saying, oh, we have a law that says if you are acting against the foreign policy interests of the United States, we can take away your green card. So that is pretty rarely used. Again, that language is kind of around terrorism and maybe extreme cases, but they're using this because there's a particular person that they don't like, and they're targeting them in a very procedurally irregular way. There was a doctor from Lebanon that was a professor here in the U.S., and because of her affiliation with again, pro-Palestinian elements, they revoked her visa. And then there was an activist in Denver who was famous for, during the first Trump administration, seeking sanctuary at a church and living at a church for a couple of years. They specifically targeted her this time around to remove her. So all very high profile, like clearly somebody at a higher level within the federal government, picking names from news articles, from people that would have been known as political opponents of the U.S. government, to specifically target them for deportation. And they're also trying to get the numbers up by going for the easiest cases, right? Checkpoints that they're going to run and people will come to them. ICE check-ins, where normally they're going to ask you to come back to the ICE office if you have a normal supervision routine. And collateral arrests, which is maybe the part that I want you to pay the most attention to. Collateral arrests are when they come to a community and they're maybe looking for one person. Maybe they have a removal order. They know that somebody might be a criminal, but instead of just stopping at that one person, they're going to go around and maybe ask every neighbor, everyone in the area that they think looks like they might not be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, to target them for enforcement as well. So that was not happening during the Biden administration, but it's restarting. So what can we do in light of all this, right? Knowing that the point is every piece of leverage the federal government has to use towards deportation, they're trying to use. What can we do? Are you also going to be co-opted into this? The good news is, if you're listening to this or you're here today, you probably do not work for the FBI, and you are under no obligation to assist the federal government in its latest experiment with authoritarianism, unless you fall into these very, very narrow circumstances. So let's talk about that. You're protected by the Fourth Amendment, which is a right for people to not be unreasonably searched and seized without probable cause, right? And where that comes into play here is what we call the reasonable expectation of privacy. If we have a reasonable expectation of privacy for certain spaces, then the government should not be able to come in without a warrant or some sort of probable cause, right? So the places that we're talking about, your workspaces, your churches, any other place that you reside that would be considered private property, we have to divide into public or private spaces, or what they call like semi-public spaces. So when we talk about businesses, we know that they are privately owned, right? So you can exert control over that area, but there are public or semi-public spaces that people are invited to all the time, right? So if you walk into a retail store, they're not going to check your ID, or people are just allowed to go in general. So public spaces are places where people can enter, such as parking lots, lobbies, waiting areas, places of business open to the general public. Those places, ICE can enter without explicit consent. They can walk in just like any other member of the public. Private spaces are places that are not open, such as staff areas, right? And sometimes it's implicit, and sometimes it's explicit, right? If you walk into a Starbucks, you're not going to try to wander behind the counter because you just assume that's not where you're supposed to be. That's going to be a staff area. But sometimes it's not so clear, right? Sometimes you're at a restaurant and they're like, hey, walk through the kitchen, the bathroom's back there. So it does get a little bit tricky, and explicitly private areas are going to be much better protection for you than implied private spaces. So places that are clearly labeled as private, with that sort of restricted area, staff only, or actually just physically protected, like a locked door. Then everybody knows that this is not space for you to enter, right? So private spaces are important to control because ICE again cannot enter without a warrant, and they cannot enter without consent. And a lot of Know Your Rights presentations, they focus around what a warrant actually looks like. So I wanted to show you a sample of what a actual judicial warrant looks like compared to an administrative one. But my caveat before we go into this too is that you probably are not going to have like this saved on your phone, or just memorize this, or even feel comfortable as like a non-attorney to do this sort of analysis. So I want to talk about it, but then I also want to iterate, like, you probably will not have to make this analysis for yourself. This is not very common. You're probably never going to see a judicial warrant in actual life. Even as a practitioner, most of my colleagues have never seen one. The federal warrants are going to be basically only seen in a very involved, resource-intensive process, like a large-scale raid that you see on the news. They're not going to go through that process to go to a local business or to find one person. It's just too resource-intensive. Even ICE themselves will put on the website like, hey, these know your rights presentations, those are lies, we'll never get a warrant anyway. So just know that you're probably not going to have to make this analysis. But a judicial warrant is going to be signed by a federal judge, and it's going to be actually issued by a federal court. So you'll see that on the top left, the court name on the top and the judge's name on the bottom, and in the middle, a very specific description of what is to be searched, like the address of the property, and what is to be seized. So again, they're never going to have this because it just is very, very resource intensive and usually not going to be used for civil immigration enforcement. What they're going to have instead is something they created themselves by their own agency, an administrative warrant. So they have something official looking, but it really doesn't require you to cooperate. So this administrative warrant is going to be signed by ICE themselves, maybe their supervisor. It's just going to say Department of Homeland Security on the top, or some variation of a federal agency, and it basically says I have permission to come in. So you don't have to listen to that. That is not an actual order by a federal judge, but you might be presented that, because one of the things ICE will have to do, if they can't enter without a warrant, remember, they have to obtain consent. They have to get you to say, okay, sure, come on in. So they'll show you this, they'll talk to you, they'll tell you whatever they think you want to hear for you to say yes, come on into my space. So is ICE allowed to lie? Law enforcement in general is allowed to lie. They call it a ruse, something that they can use to get your cooperation. So you have to be careful for pretexts and ruses. ICE may not show up in the uniforms you expect. They may be in plain clothes. They do a lot of enforcement that way. Or they might be in some sort of generic police uniform, like just federal police or something. It might not be super obvious where they're from. And they might have conversations with you to be let in, such as, oh, we're here to, there's a victim of identity theft, such and such, your coworker might be a victim of identity theft. Are they here? Can we talk to them? And then you can realize, just by even talking to them and answering those questions, you're giving up a lot of valuable information. You might give them consent to enter. You might confirm somebody's identity. You might let them also know that, somebody is present, right? So these are all tactics that they use to obtain consent to enter, and you have to be really careful about that. Now, the reasons that ICE might enter your workplace, we talked a little bit about raids and targeted enforcement. And again, you're probably not going to be seeing a raid that is probably going to be in a much larger context, where maybe like a factory or something like that, using getting the attention of the federal government for using systematic instances of undocumented labor. But targeted enforcement, again, might happen in those two contexts we talked about. High profile, you have a friend who has a green card and they are very vocally protesting against the federal government, or somebody that you know who's been undocumented for a while and maybe they have a removal order already. They may come to their places of work for that. And there is something that they also have the right to do called an I-9 audit. And anybody who's ever worked on payroll before and had received a W-2, you know that you have to fill out an I-9 when you apply for a job to verify that you have work authorization. So ICE does have the right to inspect those records, but they cannot just show up and say, let me look at them right now, let me break into your file cabinets. They have to give you a 3-day notice for you to respond and for you to kind of collect your records and make sure your affairs are in order. So if that happens, you should know that you can ask for that. They also still need your consent to enter, even for that type of enforcement. So knowing all that, what is the best way to actually interact with ICE if they do come to your office? I talked about the judicial warrant, right, and how you probably don't need to do that analysis. Maybe you are the person in your organization that needs to do that analysis. Maybe you're the supervisor, the owner, Maybe you're the lawyer. But in general, most of us, we have a chain of command, right? We have somebody that we will push requests to when we're not authorized to grant them. So the best thing that you can have in these spaces you're in is a written policy that really spells that out. You probably already have something like that, but it maybe doesn't spell out explicitly what to do in case of immigration. And it can be very generic, right? Because we don't know all the time if somebody is actually from ICE. We can try to ask them for identification. We can try to verify who they are. But sometimes, again, they might be posing as general law enforcement or other people. And in that case, you should still have the same response, right? If it's just local police, maybe you still want to have the same response. So you have a written policy, a chain of command. You designate people or a team to actually handle these interactions. So again, your supervisor, whoever's in charge. And in the meantime, you can just say, I don't have the authority to help you, to answer those questions or to let you in. So you don't have to consent to anything, and you can even revoke access. Like if you are working at a retail store and they're in there and they're talking to you, asking you to be let back into the staff areas or to talk to your coworkers or anything like that, you can say, you know what, I don't have, it's our policy that we have to discuss this outside. You're causing a disruption in here, and I don't have the authority to give you that information or to let you into those places. Let me talk to my supervisor. Let me get somebody who can help you, and why don't we continue the conversation out there, okay? That is probably the easiest thing you could do to make sure that you don't give them access, because as soon as they get consent from anybody, even if it's like, you know, a 9-year-old who's at a house or something and they're not even sure that that person has the right to get consent, they're gonna take advantage of it. So you're gonna want to document everything, every part of that interaction. You do want to make sure that if they do decide to ignore you and to maybe later claim, oh, you did give consent, you have it on, you have it in writing, you have it filmed to show that you did everything that you could to protect your rights, right? So one thing we recommend is actually filming to a live service. And the reason for that is you won't lose access to it even if something happens to your phone. I don't know if you are all aware, like there was a local NPR reporter, Josie Huang, who was filming some of the Black Lives Matter protests, and the sheriff's department didn't recognize her as a reporter and basically threw her to the ground and smashed her phone as she was recording, even though she kind of identified herself. So that turned into a big settlement, but the cops basically tried to destroy the evidence, right? Luckily, her coworkers found it was uploaded to Zoom. So you do want to document everything just in case, because at the moment, if they decide to violate the laws, if they decide to breach the Fourth Amendment, you don't have that much recourse. You're not going to be able to physically fight back, but you can preserve the evidence for later in court, and they might have to give up what they retrieved or evidence that they gathered, or even people that they detained if they were found to violate these things. So there was an example in Colony Ridge, Texas, where I believe it was 2 weeks ago, where ICE actually partnered with their version of Highway Patrol, the Texas Department of Public Safety, and they were just canvassing the town. Very, very different way of doing immigration enforcement. They were doing traffic stops, they were going door to door to businesses, and they basically picked up nearly 200 people that way. But one bakery, they knew their rights. They were like, hey, you can't be in here, you need to leave. They didn't consent to anything, and the ICE agents did leave without detaining any of the staff. So it is important to know that in these cases where they are just doing a fishing expedition, they don't actually know if anybody's undocumented in the area. They're looking for collateral arrests. if you carry these things out, you have the best chance possible of protecting people inside your community, okay? And there's something else that I wanted to talk about that's specific to California. There was a law during the first Trump administration called AB 450, and that actually said not only do you have to, not only is there the ability to protect your employees and protect their privacy and protect your private spaces, you have the affirmative obligation to do so. You're actually going to get California liability, penalties, and fines if you do not protect your employees and if you cooperate with ICE when they don't have a judicial order. So this is currently not in effect, because there's ongoing litigation around it. But most people don't know about it, and if it does resolve and California AB 450 comes into effect, you want to be already following the practices that we just talked about, because if you don't, you actually might have to pay penalties. So this creates an affirmative duty again for your employers to say, no, you cannot enter these spaces. No, you cannot look at these records without a warrant. Okay. So some additional considerations to think about for specific locations. For schools, just because you work at a school and it could be a government entity, it could be private, but in all those cases, they're still going to be able to follow the same rules around protecting student information, protecting private spaces from the federal government. They're not obligated to respond unless there's a judicial order, right? And not only is there the right to not respond, there is an affirmative obligation to not share some of that information. There is a federal rule called FERPA, and it's kind of like the school equivalent of HIPAA for medicine, right? You cannot just release a student's information and violate their confidentiality for no reason. And sometimes you might think, oh, I got a request from the federal government. That must mean it's valid, right? Anything that comes from the federal government must be legal. That is not true. That has never been the case and is less true now than ever. But there was one situation in New Jersey where an immigration attorney was told by her client's school that they got a request from ICE to release their school records, and the school was going to comply. And she said, you know what, I don't recommend it, and you are under no obligation because this is not an actual subpoena from a court. This is just a request from the federal agency. The school said, well, we're not really sure, so we're going to give the information anyway. That attorney took it to a court and got an injunction saying, you cannot release this information. It will violate FERPA, and you need to protect the student's information, unless, again, there's a subpoena from another court. So schools are under the same, they have the same protections, and they need to have additional consideration around their obligations to the confidentiality of the student information. Churches, they have the problem of having a lot of semi-public spaces, right? We're going to think about Sunday service, lots of open events. This church itself, you might see children running around in every corner of the building during Sunday. So there's going to be a balance between hospitality and privacy, right? And there's no one-size-fits-all answer for everybody, but we talked about how you can delineate actual private spaces, either by marking them as such or controlling them physically. And that is something to really consider if you have a church community that is at risk, right, of immigration enforcement. There was a pastor in Georgia who was detained during service. ICE did not come into the building, but they were waiting in the parking lot, and they requested another church member to talk to the pastor and see if they would come out. And of course, everybody is trying to follow the law and be as cooperative as possible. So he did, and he was detained, taken away from his family. But if they had followed kind of these these guidelines and just said, you know what, you can't come in, and I can't tell you anything, then the interaction might have turned out very differently, right? Who knows if he would have still been detained in a different fashion, but that day it was very likely that ICE would have left without having done anything. So knowing all of that, I wanted to talk a little bit about what do we tell our immigrant ally or immigrant friends and community members as allies. It is really, really hard right now to sort of come up with one-size-fits-all advice because things keep changing so quickly. We talked about the expedited removal. Now people are not sure, should I try to prove that I've been here for 2 years? If I show them that, then are they going to think that, you know, I'm undocumented in the first place? There's like a new law that requires everybody to register with the federal government if you're an undocumented immigrant, and they're asking, you know, what do I do about that? If I register, they're going to try to deport me. If I don't register, they're going to say I committed a crime. A lot of situations right now are just lose-lose, and they become situations where you probably need individualized legal advice. You might not be able to just get, unfortunately, you might not be able to just get some advice from general training and know that that situation fits you. So we're going to talk about that, how to get access to individualized legal advice. But the other thing I wanted to focus on is, you know, is there anything we can still do to protect ourselves and to advise people to do in general, even if we know that everybody has a different situation? And I say yes, there is probably some simple advice we can give to everybody that will minimize their chances of being detained after an encounter with ICE. It's not going to work in every single situation, but you want to, again, maximize your chances that an encounter with ICE will not result in detention. So there are a couple basic things to cover. There are so many different scenarios that could happen, but two I wanted to cover were encountering ICE in public and encountering ICE at your home. So if you encounter ICE in public, you should just, the only thing you should say to them is, am I free to go? And if they say no, then you just say, can I talk to an attorney? And that's it. There is no other flowchart for the conversation that should be happening. The reason for that is they are not here to help you. They are here to use the information against you. And it's just like the Miranda rights, right? Anything, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. That is true for criminal law. That is true in the immigration context. So again, the same thing with what we talked about for you in your workspace. No consent, right? And no information. If ICE comes to somebody's home, very similar. Don't open the door. Don't consent to letting him in. We say don't even open the door because we don't want any implied consent. We don't want to have anything construed as an invitation to come in. You know, ask who's there. Ask them to identify themselves. Ask for a warrant, and don't answer any questions. Now, in this context, you know how we talked about the warrant and saying maybe you will have somebody in your organization who can identify that. In the context of somebody who's an actual, you know, immigrant at risk of removal, I would say, you know, don't even worry about the warrant stuff, because at that moment it's probably going to be very hard for anyone to tell, anyone to try to keep a level head to remember all this information. It's 99.9% chance not going to be an actual warrant. And if you say no and there is a valid warrant, then the worst case scenario is you got to replace your door, right? The worst case scenario the other way around is now you have to pay legal fees, be detained, be separated from your family, be removed from the country. So I would say just take the risk. If you're not sure what's going on, let ICE figure it out. If they have the legal right to come in, they're going to come in. And again, don't resist, but don't make their job any easier. So the two rules that I think are the easiest way to frame these concepts is don't talk, and one phrase that we are using in the legal community is silence is golden. So don't talk. The only things you should ever say is, am I being detained? And I want to talk to an attorney, and that's it. Anything else is probably not going to help. Telling him who you are, telling him where you're from, telling him where you're born, telling him your actual legal status, all those things are probably not going to help you. If they don't know who you are and they aren't looking for you, then maybe it's not worth their trouble and they just leave it. So that's the best thing you can do. Don't consent. If you know, I'm a millennial. I grew up in the 90s, and DARE was a big thing. Just say no is their motto, and I like that one. I think it's really easy to remember. If they ask to come in, no. If they ask you for ID, if they ask you to search through your documents, everything is just no, silence or no. And that's the way that you can prevent them from getting that affirmative consent to do those things that they're not allowed to do, right? Okay, prepare for these encounters. Like, again, there are some proactive steps that we can advise people to take before they actually encounter that worst case scenario. And I wanted to talk through some of the resources that we have available on our website, because they're curated to be as helpful as possible. And I know it's hard sometimes if you just see a list of stuff to be like, oh, where do I even start? What's going to be helpful? So I wanted to talk through that. If you go to our website, rcsgv.org, and you look at the top of it, there's going to be a little banner that says, you have rights, what to do if you encounter ICE. And that's going to have a list of these resources that I'm going to go over. But we've divided them into resources for immigrants and resources for allies. So some of the things that we talked about today, if you need a recap, you can go here and you can get more detail about some of the recommendations. So the first thing that we wanted to share is the red cards. We have a bunch out front, but you can print your own. You can also order them from a print shop, and they don't have to be red. They can be whatever color you like. But the idea is that people should have these cards available to remind them of their basic rights and how to interact with ICE in the concepts we just talked about, right? I'm exercising my Fifth Amendment right to not speak to you, and I am not consenting to search or being interviewed or anything else. So having that in multiple languages for your community is going to be really helpful, and you can have that for your workplaces. Another resource that we find really helpful is this website that has videos of how to interact in different circumstances. So not everybody has the patience for a PowerPoint or wants to read through multiple PDFs to figure out what they should do. The easiest thing for people to share on these concepts is to maybe watch a video together as a family. This website has different languages available and different scenarios, like what to do if you encounter ICE at a traffic stop. What do you do if ICE comes up to you in public? What happens if ICE comes to your house? These videos can break down maybe best case or best practices in each of those scenarios. Okay, and we also recommend that people start planning ahead of time for an emergency. What happens if you're detained and your life is thrown into chaos? You don't have a plan in place for childcare, for your dependents, for maybe elderly care. You don't have a plan in place for how your relatives can access your legal documents. These are all things you can prepare ahead of time so that you minimize the impact of an emergency, right? And so this step-by-step family plan by ILRC helps guide people through that, specifically for California. What are some of the tools that they can use to already give people permission to take care of their children, to organize things like their medical information, to organize things like their legal documents. So that is also a really helpful set of steps that somebody can take ahead of time to feel a little bit safer and more confident that they're prepared for the worst case scenario. And we talked about how individualized legal advice is going to be really important in this context, right? Where the law is changing constantly, all the time, and people don't know what to expect, and a lot of legally untested things are popping up left and right. We would love to serve every member of our community. We do have a small team of just 5 people in the legal side, and we know that we're not going to be able to do that all by ourselves. So we are sharing referral lists that we have in person, and also a website that covers the entire US for every single nonprofit that can provide pro bono help and direct legal services. So this is very handy for being able to search up your location by zip code. And even if you are looking for private attorneys, this would point you to local nonprofits that probably have referral lists, just like we do, of people who are trusted in the community to be able to do that legal work. Even if they're at capacity, they should be able to provide you a referral list. So that's what we've been doing right now. We are at capacity, but we are still referring to other trusted private attorneys and other organizations that we know are much larger and still have capacity. Okay, and then we talked about some resources for us as allies. There are different websites that can kind of recap what we just went over, but the one that I really wanted to highlight was creating your own written policy for your workplace, right? And what to document if ICE does come to your workplace. There is a PDF that has a sample plan already, so you can kind of adopt that policy and tweak it for your own places of work, or present that to your supervisors and see if you can make some recommendations. And that PDF is released by the Lawyers Alliance in New York. So it is New York specific, but the general principles kind of apply to everybody in the country. You know, the Fourth Amendment is a constitutional right available for everybody. So I do recommend looking at that as a starting point, and that's what we did for our own organization in Mountainside Communion. I also talked about California-specific laws, right? AB 450, and how we have to prepare for the scenarios in which we actually have an affirmative duty to our employees. This guide is good for that because it kind of integrates all the best practices and talks about the requirements of AB 450. That is also on the website, and it's by ILRC. So we recommend just being in compliance because it's going to protect your employers and also protect you, protect your employees and protect you as an employer if AB 450 ever comes fully back into effect. Okay, so we covered a lot today, and we are exactly at 10:30. And I wanted to now open up the time for questions. And before we get into that, I know that we covered a lot, and we did open with kind of a depressing note, right, of all the things that were happening, and all the ways that we were kind of afraid of the overreach of the federal government. But one thing that I've always tried to talk about is if the federal government's plan is to instill fear in our community, is to make people feel like they are separated, make immigrants feel like they no longer belong, and that they can't trust anyone within the community. The way that we fight back, we can't control the federal government, we can't control these laws, but we can control the spaces around us, right? We do control our places of work, our places of community gathering, and we can create safe spaces for people. We can make people feel welcome, even if you don't know their immigration status or what they're going through, or if people don't feel comfortable sharing that, you can make people feel, any immigrant you know, feel like they are welcome, they are safe, and that you are going to stand by them no matter what. And by having access to these resources, by having clear policies for your own places where you can say, hey, we put this in place to safeguard, you know, everybody, you can start to make people feel more comfortable. And hopefully, by showcasing the rest of the country, how we're taking care of each other, right? And how we're building a better community by doing that, we're going to present an alternative to the violence that's happening, to the family separation that's happening, and to the narrative that the only way that we're going to fix things is by breaking them, right? So thank you all for being here, and I believe that we can do this as a community. All right, so let's
We will pass the mics around, and if you have questions, put your hand up, and Gene or I will bring you a mic.
And be sure to speak directly into the mic so that we catch it on YouTube.
Thanks so much. A three-part question, if I may, if we have time. First part is, as people who participate in ICE watches, what I'm hearing a lot more is less interference from county or city law enforcement, and more around potential federal charges of those of us getting in the way. Have you heard anything about that? Part two is, once a neighbor has been detained by ICE, what action can I take? And part three is, of the beds that you said, or the cells that they have, that ICE has capacity for, how many are those actual ICE facilities versus pay-to-play for-profit prisons?
Yeah.
If you have that number. I'm sure it's right on the top of your head.
Yeah. Right. Just memorize everything. No. Well, okay. So let's see if I can remember all of your questions. First, you know, that has been a major concern, right? You asked about how the federal government is actually threatening people, both elected officials, local law enforcement, and probably community members about criminal charges if they don't cooperate, right? Like, they're saying things like, oh, you're basically aiding and abetting, you're harboring an alien, you're breaking all these criminal laws. One, again, while you cannot do certain things, like you cannot physically resist, you can't, in one of the scenarios I described about ICE coming to your place of business, you can't hide people, but you don't have to cooperate, right? None of these laws give you an affirmative duty to help the federal government. So if you just sit there and do nothing and tell them they don't have permission, they might hem and haw and threaten you with criminal prosecution, and maybe we will see that at again, like the media visibility stage for mayors and heads of law enforcement. But the law is very clear, like they cannot force you to do that. And there's anti-commandeering principles in the Constitution too. They can't even force local law enforcement to do that. So there's gonna be a big push from the federal government to try to do what they did in Texas, to try to use local law enforcement as a force multiplier. California has been pretty good about that, and we just had a great conversation with Monrovia Police Department, who reiterated their commitment to following state law and not doing that, and following the rules that they have in place and the policies they have in place around sanctuary policies. But it's not true for everywhere. Huntington Beach, for example, said we're going to break California law and join the feds. So these are places of local impact that you can also make a difference, where you can make sure that local politicians and law enforcement have the backing of the community to not fold under that federal pressure, right? Because it is very intense, the language that they're using. But again, the law is really clear. Is unlikely that anyone will get prosecuted for the criminal liability for not cooperating. I already forgot your second question.
My
But
neighbors been detained by ICE.
okay, yeah. So one thing I went too quickly through, actually. Okay, so at our website, we do have a couple of numbers. The first one is the Rapid Response Network for Los Angeles. So this may vary from place to place, but if you're anywhere in LA County, Churla is taking the lead for handling reports of ICE in the community and also sending out legal observers. So an attorney and a team that's going to document what's been happening. So we say, if you are stopped or you're like, your neighbor is stopped by ICE or you see ICE in the community, they do want you to contact Churla, who's going to organize that information, because they also know it's not helpful to just blast stuff on social media when we're not sure. Sometimes there were there was a scare in Monrovia that turned out not to be true. But whenever there's like a false report of ICE too, that also sends a lot of damage to the community and sends people, kids home from school and people home from work. We don't want to be causing unnecessary fear. So Churla will be able to do that. If somebody is detained, now you're beyond the point of let's document what's happening to I need legal representation in immigration court. And so IMDEF is the largest nonprofit in Los Angeles that will do that. You'll see below another hotline, Immigrant Defenders. Again, that will be location specific, but for Los Angeles, they're kind of the clearinghouse for most of that work. There are a couple other nonprofits that are starting to enter that space as well, because there is more funding from California. But they are the largest ones. So they're a good place to start, and they should be able to refer if they don't have capacity. And finally, your question, I think I don't know the number, but the vast majority of the beds are contracted, by GEO. So it is a lot of private institutions that are making a lot of money off this, because it is very cost intensive for the federal government to be building their own long-term capacity if they're not sure they're going to be able to commit it year after year. So they generally have a budget for how many beds they're going to have, and then they try to fill that with a mixture of public and private. And I know there's like a lot of controversy around like private and public spaces, institutions that are basically making money off this. It is pretty exploitative of lobbyists and private companies to be earning a profit from this. But I also don't like public jails like Guantanamo Bay for this purpose. It's equally oppressive to be thrown into a government jail. So I think there are many complaints to be leveled against that system. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, and they're kind of LA specific, but you would probably look for a rapid response network. You would probably want to Google that to see if there's going to be other area networks, because every kind of major, metropolitan area has their local communities organized for something like this. And even within LA, there are different organizations doing this work. It can get much more local than just the county, right? And when ICE came to Alhambra, I think there was a very local organization that just drove around following them with bullhorns and telling people, hey, don't open your doors, and they need a warrant, and it worked. People were like, okay, well, let's just follow that advice, and I think ICE left without getting much done that day. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Hi, I have the microphone.
Yes.
I have several questions also. Is your car considered private space?
One question a person, because there's lots of people who want to.
Oh my.
Is that all right? So if you pick your favorite one, and then
Okay.
we can loop back if we get through everybody else's questions.
Okay.
Okay, so car?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, you can choose
I'm
different.
trying to figure out which one is the most important.
Yeah.
When you say nothing, do they come back to your home?
They could, but it takes time and money. So again, we go back to the resources, right? It's not one-to-one. They're always going to have to send a team of people, right, to detain one person. And they have to investigate. They have to look up where people live, where they work, where they might, conduct their daily routine. If they go out and they don't get anything accomplished that day, they might not come back because the rest of their itinerary might be full already. So that is a very practical problem that they have. They just are not able to be everywhere at once. So by doing things like this, you don't guarantee, you don't guarantee that you're going to be indefinitely safe, but you make it harder for the federal government to conduct these actions. And every step that becomes more difficult for them means that there's one less, detention that they're going to be able to carry out.
Other questions?
Good morning. I'm the principal of the elementary school right one block away. So my question, and you might have covered it earlier, I came a little bit late. Have you heard any instances anywhere in the country about ICE trying to enter in public schools?
Yeah, I haven't heard of anything post inauguration. A lot of times, though, they will be nearby. That is one thing that they will consider to be kind of acceptable. If they know, for example, somebody is dropping off their kid to a certain school every day, they might want to conduct a traffic stop right after they drop off the child or pick them up, and that would be a pretty common strategy. So I would, the memo I talked about where they removed the sensitive locations, you would still think it would be pretty rare because they are aware of the optics, right? A lot of this is focused around for public consumption, so they do not want a circus to happen. And it will be rare that there will be a school enforcement. But again, we now know it's possible, and we want to think about the ways that we're going to protect our locations if it does happen to us.
Cool, thank you. And,
Yeah.
and I'm sorry, just a little dovetail on that. Do we have anything here in Monrovia, a communication platform of some sort, that if they are in the area, that how I can get alerted to that?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I think I'm not on anything myself. I think Churla, again, is kind of the clearinghouse for a lot of the local actions. So I wouldn't be surprised if they have some social media presence. I know there had been a lot of different apps that people had been using, but I haven't found like a consolidated one, like one place that most people are going to. So I think looking at Churla's social media, their website, to see if they have a central location for announcements would be a really great way to get up-to-date notifications. Yeah, CHIRLA.
Hello, real quick. Is there any special advice for private land that is outdoors, such as construction sites, farms, yards? How much should the owner intervene? Where do we go with that? Or do we just call Churla?
Yeah. Well, again, it goes back to the public-private spaces. So a lot of stuff, everything you mentioned is private property, but maybe some is going to be more or less controlled. Just because a farm is like open doesn't mean the owners want people randomly trespassing all the time. So I think there, again, is a case where you can, even if it looks like there might be access, the owners should revoke it and say, hey, you need to leave, you're not allowed to be here. That doesn't mean the ICE will listen, but again, if you record that interaction and they don't have consent, then it will be up to the courts to decide, okay, is there a violation of Fourth Amendment here? Was there an expectation of privacy that they covered? So I think that's the most important thing, like documenting the lack of consent. And there's not much else you can do, but you can at least try to protect your property that way. And again, if you have actually physically locked places, they're going to have to take a much bigger step to, break open a door than they would just walking into an open field.
Other questions? Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much. It's very informative. At the last Immigration Task Force meeting at my church, the question was brought up, what advice do we have for people who have legal visas, are green card holders, or naturalized citizens to be involved in immigration topics right now, because they are scared with all the arrests that have been happening.
Yeah, and you know what? That space is evolving, because even as we talked about today, normally all those categories, I would say you're pretty safe. You're not going to be politically targeted, it's a scale of safety. If you're a naturalized citizen, you are pretty much in a space where you cannot have that taken away from you unless you became naturalized through fraud. Like basically you answered questions on your application that were not true. Common examples are like there is a denaturalization force looking for Nazis. Like if you were a Nazi and you hid the whole time and you somehow became a citizen, they're going to take that away from you and deport you. Whether or not that's going to be expanded beyond Nazis, that's an open question. It's very, very rare and very difficult to take that away. The more kind of entrenched your right is, the more work the government has to do to take it away from you. Green cards are like one step lower. They're not citizens. They are subject to all sorts of rules on when and what they can and cannot do, and if they don't follow them, then they can get removed. And before I would have said, well, freedom of speech, as long as you're not explicitly, breaking some sort of criminal law, I don't see how that would affect you. But we now know if you get famous enough, Department of State will come after you personally. So there's some risk. I wouldn't say it's going to be everybody, but I would keep that in mind, how visible you're planning to make yourself in the context. And of course you can, if there's uncertainty, then usually I want to take the more conservative approach and say, why don't you apply for citizenship first and then go back out to the protest. And visas is the lowest, right? They can revoke that for almost any reason. So they can stop you at the border on the way back, and if they suspect that you're violating the visa in any way, like, oh, you're here to work, oh, you plan to do this or that isn't in line with your visa, then they'll just revoke it. And so you hear stories of like Germans and Canadians and different people who would normally not be caught up in the immigration system, being very surprised and alarmed when they're stuck in detention for a couple of weeks with no idea what's going on. So that can happen, and I would just advise people to be very careful these days, because there's a lot more discretion at the very low levels of enforcement to just, again, maximally enforce against any individual.
We have a real privilege to have our city manager here with us. Dylan Feek is the city manager of Monrovia, and kind of connected with some of those questions. We had a great meeting, myself, some IRC staff, Gene, this last week with Dylan and our chief of police. So Dylan, I wonder if you would just speak to 2-3 minutes to kind of the gist of our meeting the other day and kind of how Monrovia is operating with participating with federal government, and then anything you can nod to in other LA cities if you're comfortable, that would be great. So this is Dylan Feek.
I've never been afraid of a microphone, but thanks for putting me on the spot, Pastor. Thank you all. It's very nice to see many. I know many of you I don't know, but just a little bit about me. My name's Dylan. My wife Kira and I have 3 kids. We raise them right here in Monrovia. Our 3 kids one goes to Clifton, 2 go to Wild Rose. We interact with a lot of people in this community. What I think is important is that in a community, wherever you come from, the reason you're there and you're part of that community. One of my favorite stories to tell is I used to work up north in Napa Valley when we had the Tubbs fire in 2017. was a catastrophic wildfire, killed 38 people, destroyed almost 8,800 homes. And there's a time where we're up in the middle of the night and the entire city's been evacuated. And we're talking to people, and I spoke to an undocumented immigrant, and he was wondering, what do I do? What do I take? What do I, I've got my family out of the house, what do I grab? And we said, grab all the important paperwork that you can and just get out. And so he grabbed all of his bills so he could come back home one day and pay them. And for me, that was like a point in time where I just like understood the nature of a community and the fabric that holds a community together. One of my biggest concerns is ICE and the federal government can come in and do things that can completely erode the trust that cities build with their communities day in and day out. And it makes us very, very afraid of what they could do. I mean, we talk about community policing. For 30 years, we've had this wonderful program that's about bridging relationships in the community and how can we serve the public the best. Well, when ICE comes in with vests that say police on the back, what are people to think? They think that's the local law enforcement. And so it's very concerning to us. So we had the privilege of speaking with Pastor Smith and a few others last week. We just wanted to make sure that the city's long-time policy was very clear. So in the city of Monrovia, for probably 2 decades, we have a very clear immigration enforcement policy that basically says we don't implement federal law. So if ICE wanted to use our jails, they cannot, they will not, we won't let them. We don't assist with any work that they do. There are times where ICE may have, let's say, a warrant that they've issued. And so let's say we make a stop and there's a warrant that a law enforcement agency has on an individual. We're legally required to notify the agency, but we also get to release the person if they're not picked up immediately. So in a case like that, the city of Monrovia does not hold people in a jail cell or wait for ICE to respond. We just go comply with our duty, usually after we've let the person walk out the front door. In Monrovia, we have a don't ask requirement. We have a zero, it's actually written in a department policy that officers do not ask any questions related to people's immigration status. They can't. Sometimes it comes out through someone offering it to us, but probably 99% of the time, a person is issued a citation for whatever the violation may be, regardless of immigration status, and then they're released. If they had committed a crime that is potentially like a felony, well, then they might actually be held because of the seriousness of the crime. But we have a community policing team that we've been talking about putting together some different, I'm going to call them public speaking opportunities. So many of you affiliated with churches who may want us to come and speak. We want to be very sensitive and ask that you ask us to come and speak to your groups. It's not the kind of thing we want our law enforcement just showing up and talking to people, but ultimately in Monrovia, we're all about community. And I can't overstate that enough, that our concern really is about how the federal government could come into Monrovia and do something that, in our minds is very against what we've been trying to do for 20 years, which is essentially build a community. So if you have a paper and a pencil, I would be happy to, I'm going to share my phone number. This is my personal cell phone number. I always joke that if you ever call me at 2 a.m. in the morning, I will probably answer, and I swear I will return the favor one day. But my phone number is 801-821-1734. In this town, social media, I think, is the best way to connect with one another. So just know, if you see, the City of Monrovia Police Department out in the community, they are 100% unequivocally not doing anything involved with immigration or with ICE. But if you see ICE and you see them out there, share it on social media. It's gonna spread really quickly in this town. That's a lot of times how I find out. And certainly with my phone number, if you ever have a question or suspicion that they might be in town, reach out to me. I'll find out and get you an answer. But 99% of the time, it's probably going to be no, that's not them, it's someone else. Is that good for overview? Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Don. Maybe we have time for 1 or 2 more questions, or you want to speak to, you want to say anything in response to that? No? Okay.
I just want to say thank you, Dylan. It's my first time meeting you, but I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that you have put into these policies and the way that you're cultivating the community. And that is what we hope to be able to do. You know, when people come to us and they say, you know, I'm undocumented, can I trust the city? Can I talk to the police here? You know, a crime happened to me, can I report that? We want to be able to say, yes, like the focus here is on protecting the community. And in fact, you know, there will be benefits available if you cooperate with the police. So that is, you know, not true for every jurisdiction, and we are grateful to have that here, that collaborative environment. And so thank you, Dylan, and thank you to the city of Monrovia for that. Yeah.
What do you know about the super prison in El Salvador?
Yeah.
Like,
not too much, except, well, you know, it works out for us because they also have a policy of indefinitely detaining people without a hearing right now. Like El Salvador had been racked by a lot of gang activity for years and years, and so their current president, as a public safety measure, basically says, if we think you're a gang member, we're going to throw you in jail, and you don't get a chance to appeal or a hearing. You don't have to be convicted. You're just a gang member, you go to jail. And so they've been building out capacity for these huge maximum security prisons, like tens of thousands of people can fit in them. So, you know, that's usually something that we were concerned about for their domestic affairs and civil rights on that front, but now it's affecting us because we are partnering with them to also house people indefinitely. So it's a question mark what the end game is, right? Like when we send these Venezuelans to El Salvador, are they planning to keep them forever? Under what grounds are they going to, you know, be released? And what chances do they have to appeal within either the Salvadoran legal system or the American legal system? We don't know, and it's kind of very novel and very concerning because you know, when the government kind of the reason why the U.S. government likes to shove people into stuff off U.S. soil is that we don't have the same amount of protections, and we can claim we don't have jurisdiction over it anymore, right? So Guantanamo, El Salvadoran prisons are going to operate under a different set of rules, and we can disappear people. So very concerning.
Good morning. First of all, thank you, the staff, your board, all of your volunteers for the courage that you bring to our community. I want to celebrate that, the courage, the sacrifice, the commitment, and the passion that you have. I literally came across someone 2 days ago who I didn't know quite well, and they were talking about the resources that they are receiving in this season through the Immigration Resource Center. So it's very evident that the work that you all are doing with courage and with passion and with love is making a lasting impact in so many people right now. So may God continue to bless everything that you each are doing. So the first is an expression of gratitude because we have a long road ahead of us. If we go back to the registering component, in one of your slides, and that's where my question is at, that people are being, can you talk more about that? Is it, are people being encouraged? Does it need to happen? What is it? What is it not? And I know you can only answer based on what you know today because everything is changing literally every 2 hours in our country. So my question is, can you expand more on that registration thing you were talking about? What is it? And based on what you know, if someone does register, could it potentially have a negative impact? Many people abstain from getting a California driver's license because in California you could be undocumented and get a driver's license, but some people are afraid to because they're like, now we're a part of a database. For those that don't have legal status, they are known as those that live in the shadows. They'd rather not be visible, and now, whether through getting a driver's license or once you share what that registration thing is more about, can potentially make them more visible.
Yeah, so there's an old law that actually has never really been enforced post-World War II that requires everybody to register if you're an immigrant. And most Most people are registered already if they're immigrants, because if you come in through different pathways, like getting a visa, getting your I-94 when you enter, or even applying for something like a work permit, you're registered with the government. However, if you're undocumented, you are not on their database, and of course, you know, it's kind of, I described it as lose-lose. It's clearly, it's not, they're not even trying to hide this. It's just a tool for enforcement, right? You register and then they're going to be like, great, let's deport you. That is what it's for, to kind of create a list of people to conduct enforcement actions against. The good thing is it's not live yet. It's live in April 11th of this year. And then you have to go onto a website and create it, and it's going to be English only, and I can't even get my clients to use the website right now for benefits, so I'm not sure how they're going to expect people to use that thing to get deported. But the concerning part is if you don't do it, they say you have criminal liability, 6 months in jail, $5,000. So now we can, yeah, just now everyone's a criminal. So we are holding off. There's pending litigation. It might stop it. Nobody has to do anything until April 11th. And I'm telling everyone, you got to talk to an attorney before you register, because it might be bad if you register. It might be bad if you don't register. It depends on what's going on in your particular life and circumstances. And yeah, it's tricky. Everyone will have to make that call depending on a set of factors. And as an attorney, I will tell people the consequences and recommend based off like what they tell me they're most concerned about. And it's going to be pretty individualized. I won't stand here and say nobody register, everybody register. Part of it is let's see what happens. Let's wait for that April 11th. And then the other part is I need to kind of make sure that the advice is tailored to you know, specific people. So let's hope for some court to enjoin it before it gets too far. The website goes live, and the registration is required at that point. Yeah.
I think even without being able to give advice, it's like this is so key because until you said it, I had no idea this thing existed.
Yeah.
Education.
Yeah. So can they retroactively punish people for not doing a thing that they said you had to do within 30 days, but they never even created a mechanism for? That's going to be a question for the courts to answer, and we'll see. So I think it's a little early, because again, this is like the untested area. Is this even legal? We don't know, and if until we have better idea, it's hard to recommend that people put themselves in danger, right?
I think we're at time.
Oh, we're at time. If you have a couple more questions for Jonathan, I think you can stay for like 5 or 10 more minutes. Is that right?
Yeah, that's fine.
And for the lady who didn't get to ask all her questions, please come up. We want to thank you guys for being here today. You will receive another email from me, and I will share more with how you can be more involved with the IRC, because we'd love to have you as a volunteer or as a monthly donor or a friend. And we have lots of fun projects and events coming up that we would love for you to be a part of. What we like to say here is all are welcome and all are beloved. And that is our heart and our joy, and it's why we're here. And so we're going to get through this together. It is rough out there. It is insane, but we're going to do it together. And I'm just so pleased to see all of you here today. Thank you for coming.